Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the 817 podcast, where we talk about the biggest news, culture, politics, trends, business happening in the great city of Fort Worth and Tarrant County. EJ, it's been a minute.
It has. I mean, I don't know the last intro you did. It was like a month ago, and now you're coming in hot. We got a lot to talk about.
Yeah,
because we had an interview, we had Labor Day, and a ton of news. So we're gonna be bringing in the heat.
Yeah, we got a lot to dive into, and honestly, like, it was a big weekend for Fort Worth. Like, we went to the Killers last night at Dickey's.
Oh, nice. How was that?
It was awesome. It was probably 90% full. Like,
there you go.
It was crowded. A gallery night was happening. There was a big thing happening outside in the lawn of the Modern.
Okay.
Yeah, it felt like everybody was vibing last night.
Yeah. And then the weather shifted, so that's always good too.
Yeah,
the
we
weather
can go
shifted.
outside again.
Football's back, so
TCU game last night.
Yep. So Fort Worth is back, baby. And we're also back in school. And with new school, we got new leader. We finally have a new superintendent, Dr. Angelica Ramsey. She comes from Midland ISD as the superintendent of Midland. There's not much here to jump into, but this is, for context for everyone, we do 3 short stories, 1 big story, and then wins and losses for the city of Fort Worth. And so our first short story is just Dr. Ramsey, who will replace Dr. Kent Scribner. It seems like I haven't heard a lot. Only thing I really have heard is that, she was a free reduced lunch kid. She kind of comes back from this background. She really talks about all students. She also came from Midland, where she had a long contract with Midland. So it seems like Midland's a little salty of her leaving so early. But yeah, I mean, I'm imagining that the next couple of weeks for Dr. Ramsey is going to be busy, just saying hello to a lot of people. Have you heard anything or people discuss what this move has done for Fort Worth ISD?
Not really yet. The whole process is interesting to me because we didn't see any of the process, like all of a sudden there was a Fort Worth ISD board meeting, and we have this one finalist that we're approving. And it was kind of like, how'd we get to this point? Is she the only one that applied? But overall, seems like she has a lot of goals for Fort Worth ISD that will continue the work that Scribner has been doing, and hopefully continue the track that the school district is on. Our grade went up this year. Like, I think across the board, our elementary schools are in a really, really great spot. So just kind of hopefully continuing that trend.
Yeah, and I think what's powerful for Fort Worth ISD, for her being here, is that Midland ISD, population-wise on a student count, it's smaller. She served school districts in California, and gained a reputation for helping campuses show improvement. But what's interesting is, like, she has work in California, but then she goes to Midland, which, I mean, that's conservative area. So you think about all the other crazy shenanigans that are happening in school board meetings and things like that with parents. That experience, I also think, will be valuable coming from a Midland, navigating that, then coming to a bigger city. I feel like if we got a superintendent that was from out of the state of Texas, or maybe didn't have to experience these kind of book ban energy and all that stuff, crosses and posters and all that stuff, and God We Trust posters. This seems like someone who has experience of this if we're leading a district in Midland, Texas. So I think that's a benefit for us here in Fort Worth.
Yeah, it's been so long. We never even got to talk about the "In God We Trust" posters. What a funny set of shenanigans. And is it South Lake ISD is being sued now for not accepting them?
I have no idea what the update is on that story. All I know is that they did not accept the Muslim, gay, pride kind of versions of the posters, because they said they had enough of the normal conservative ones donated to them.
So then the next thing that happened is the posters from the Christian cell phone company are actually illegal in terms of like the ordinance, the state ordinance or whatever. Like they have an extra flag on them or some extra stars on them that make them fall outside of the purview of what is allowed. And also by the state ordinance, you're not allowed to reject any. And so the people that donated the Muslim and LGBTQ posters are now suing the ISD for having illegal posters and rejecting theirs.
Yeah. It's just crazy that all this is happening while we just need kids to learn, teachers to be supported, and like, you know, make things happen for kids. But right now we're talking about these crazy posters that Texas wants to provide.
Hilarious.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and go to something else that's not hilarious. Let's actually dive into the data around the Fort Worth Women's Prison. We talked about this a little bit earlier in our pod when Tony was on. We talked about the medical center Carswell was the nation's only medical prison for women and has the highest rate of sexual assault allegations compared to any other federal women's prison since 2014 and 2018. The highest number of assault allegations against staff is also a thing. In that period, 35 women at Carswell reported they were sexually assaulted by a staff member. There's even cases against staff who were already had allegations and already had cases, but yet were able to still work in the system. The new update here is that U.S. Rep. Marc Veasey urged the House committee to hold a hearing in North Texas to investigate the sexual assaults in federal prisons. He, is deeply disturbed by these reports and strongly believes the stories of the victims merit further investigation on a national scale. Wrote a letter to the committee. On Tuesday, Veasey asked the committee to examine prisons with a high number of reports of sexual misconduct, cover-ups by correctional staff with an emphasis on Carswell. He requested the committee to hold a field hearing and ask the Bureau of Prisons directly how it is actively addressing inappropriate behavior by staff in our federal prisons. Crazy things like why are male staff members even allowed to be alone with women who are in their care? I think this is another example of how the county and the city of Fort Worth are not protecting those who are doing wrong. We talked about Alex Kim with juvenile. We've talked about Wayburn and COVID and deaths in prisons. This just seems like a systemic issue in our county, in our city.
Yeah, we missed a great opportunity to vote out Bill Wayburn last year, and hopefully next time, because he is neglectful at best when it comes to doing his job. But yeah, the big next step is like Marc Veasey is bringing this to the attention of the House Committee on the Judiciary. Kay Granger was reached out to for comment and didn't respond. But overall, like, just because a person is in prison does not mean that they should be treated as worthless. And that's what we're telling these people, is that their well-being does not matter because of something that they did, a mistake they made. And while they're obviously doing time to reckon with that and to pay for that, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be taken care of. And so it's definitely a stain on Fort Worth that this is what gets Fort Worth trending on Twitter.
Yeah, and shout out to Kaylee Johnson and the work she did in investigating Fort Worth Carswell's Women's Prison. It was a detailed story, and talking about Miss Dudley and her story. And I mean, I don't remember what Dudley did to get in prison, but it wasn't even that serious. Like, it wasn't even like that crazy. And just to see her sentence for a drug conviction, the 37 months, and just dealing with all the things that she had to deal with along the way. And now the anxiety and the depression and all the stuff that comes from feeling powerless because people who have to be responsible of you abusing their power. It's frightening, and I think it's really crazy. Also, just like the lack of capacity with staff, and all of this. At the end of the day, I always just think about the profiteering of these systems, keeping these people in there. Pays bills for a lot of businesses, it's all just sad. And I know one of our upcoming short stories is about what Republican leaders are saying about politics, but the fact that we're not saying anything about, you got Alex Kim and the juvenile lack of holding cases to support juvenile students, and then when you do, you put them on live stream like you're a Twitch star, and then you got Wayburn, and we never really heard anything from the COVID and the Wayburn cases. It just kind of seemed like it went past, and now you have this Carswell thing, which sure, it got Marc Veasey's saying something, but what are we saying as well from our city people and our political figures locally?
Yeah, how are we voting to hold these people accountable that give a bad name to the city and the area, right? Like, we'll talk about Alex Kim later, but like, that's an elected person that we can get rid of. Talk about Bill Wayburn, that's an elected person that we can get rid of. Like, we hold the power to bring reform if that is what we want. And we have to hold our elected officials accountable is the bottom line. Yeah.
And the two people under Kim are also running for positions. I think one of them is unopposed. Yeah. So, it's just crazy that this is allowed. And we'll see what happens next after the letter from Marc Veasey.
Yeah. Well, talking about holding elected officials accountable and our elections, there was some spice this week around Judge Glen Whitley and former Mayor Betsy Price about who they would or would not endorse for the upcoming elections. And we'll start with Glen because he's the one that actually said something, and that is that he is not endorsing Dan Patrick on the state level, which is a big thing that a high-ranking GOP official is saying, like, I'm supporting the Democrat in this race. And he's not the only one across the state that has come out and said this recently. He was on the podcast Y'all-itics and said and endorsed Dan Patrick's opponent. So
Mike Collier.
Yeah, Mike Collier. And that's a big thing for him to step out and say that. It's less big because he's retiring, right? Like, now we've got this guy who has been a long-standing official in Tarrant County, and because of that, he has had to pander to his base of voters. Now that he's retiring, he doesn't need their votes anymore, so he can actually speak his mind, say what he actually thinks about a lot of these candidates. He wouldn't endorse Deborah Peoples, but he has said before that he does not support Tim O'Hare, or he does not support the campaign he's run. He said that Tim O'Hare is wrong for Tarrant County. I'm like, you already came out and said that. Like, just say you should vote for Deborah Peoples, even if she's not your favorite candidate. But I did think that it was a big step for him to come out and say, I'm not supporting Dan Patrick.
Yeah, I just wonder. I mean, what I loved about that little interview was he just kind of talked about how much money the state is holding. We've talked about the cash that the state has on in the bank, and how now this Sunday paper at the Star Telegram just came out about property taxes and how companies and taxes they're able to really save a lot of money from American Airlines. They're saying that saved up to 500 homes that are it would be like 500 homes that they basically reduce on property taxes. That's how much the reduction. Walmart, Amazon, Facebook. And to me, so it's like there's like this opportunity because like he talked about how Dan Patrick has all this money. He's not doing anything to help local officials then getting treated like crap by the state. And then having the property taxes go up because the state is not helping with education.
Yeah.
But yet I just feel like to get the moderate Republican, what Glen Whitley, I think that message needs to be on a megaphone is your property taxes are going up because your state is not funding or doing anything to support your cities like states should. So all these states people have to go. Mm-hmm. And I think because I think that like little combo right there, I just think it's going to hit a lot of people home. You see papers where, wow, Walmart's saving on property taxes. I'm paying for Walmart. I'm paying for Amazon. And it's also because my state isn't going to give us any money. So I just think there's a perfect messaging here for the Mike Colliers, the Betos, the Deborahs to say, hey, we're going to make sure businesses pay their fair share of property taxes so that you can reduce your property taxes. That seems like a pretty centrist combo that I think you can get moderate Republicans to also go with Glen Whitley here and say, yeah, I'm also going to go on the other side because what matters to me is my finances, which now shows he's saying you care about your finances, vote for Mike Collier. Yeah,
and it piggybacks on a recent, I think it was a Star Telegram article about how people think that being in Texas, they're going to pay less taxes because they don't pay a state income tax. However, when you actually look at what you're paying, you are paying more than people in California.
100.
And that is something that has been attempted to be covered up for a long time. But like you said, that's the messaging. Like, you guys say that you want a more fiscally responsible candidate. Look, these guys are not being fiscally responsible. I can do that. I can actually help your taxes and your tax situation. I can help us spend money wisely, as opposed to what we're seeing right now, which is a lot of smoke and mirrors and messaging that isn't actually true.
Yeah, and they're harping on, the states has all this saved cash because we're doing well with money. But then why are you not saving money as a Texan, right? Your electric bill's up,
right?
Your property taxes are up, so they're beating their chests of all this economic value in Texas and look at all this billions of dollars we're sitting on, but it's not impacting our lives,
right?
So it's a good. What's your take on the Betsy piece? The Betsy also kind of came in and didn't really say much more direct than Whitley, but did say some things.
Yeah, it's a perfect Betsy Price response, right? Like, you shouldn't just go and vote down the ballot. Like, you shouldn't just go and vote for all the Republicans. You should vote for the best candidate. And I'm like, look, you played this both sides thing for so long, even though, like, we know your true colors. And apparently, for some reason, you still think or want to have this political career in front of you, so you won't actually endorse who the quote-unquote best candidates are, even though you're saying that they're not the Republicans. Just come out and endorse the people. Like, Tim O'Hare drug you through the mud. He made you miserable. Deborah Peoples didn't do that.
Yeah.
Like, just come out and say, hey, Deborah's a better candidate here. Like, Tim O'Hare's a dick. He's a bad choice for Tarrant County. Like, just come out and say that. You're in your 70s. Like, you don't need to have a political career anymore. Like, spend that time with your grandkids like you said you would. And come out and actually tell us what you mean, not this smoke and mirrors of support the best candidate.
Yeah, and so a little bit for take there is, for the first time in Price's 22 years in local politics, she did not say to report to vote for Republicans in the fall. Quote, don't just go and start marking somebody because they're one party of the other. The former white Fort Worth mayor said, an abrupt change of tone from her years endorsing Donald Trump and lesser Republicans. Go out and make sure you pick the candidate who's going to give you good governance, she said. That's all I'll say. So, yeah, I feel like some people, I've heard some, local people in Fort Worth believe Betsy Price I mean, Deborah Peoples has a legit shot here at this seat because of so much of the underground of the classist Republicans are like, they're on the same page here. You remember the endorsement from the Stockyards mayor. It seems like this is a thing, but to me, I don't see how I just don't see it because I'm so used to Deborah not pulling it off.
Yeah.
And also running a not sophisticated campaign often, but even just her consistency should inspire people to give her a shot.
Yeah, I mean, she's a name and a face that people are going to recognize at least when they're going in there, even if they have, voted against her for mayor 2 or 3 times. So I'm with you on that feeling. But if she's going to beat anybody, it's going to be Tim O'Hare.
Yeah, and the other kind of power, what I would love about it is like, man, just think about the dynamic. Like, I can't imagine if I was the mayor of Fort Worth and I had to choose between Tim O'Hare or Deborah Peoples as my like constituent for being a purple city. I think that's like, I feel like the relationship between a Deborah Peoples and a Maddie Parker would go a lot better than Tim O'Hare and Maddie Parker. Like, imagine the stress and anxiety that the Tim O'Hare would bring, because I don't think Tim O'Hare's end is just wanting to be, if he pulls this off, I think his ambition is to go further. And the way you go further is to pester more of these quote unquote, not real Republicans, is how he calls Glen Whitley now and all this stuff. And so that would just be a thorn in Mayor Parker's, that's why I'm thinking if I was Betsy or Maddie, like, just get out the way, just rip the Band-Aid off, because then you're going to have to deal with losing later because Tim O'Hare is going to going to say some things about you.
Yeah, I understand. Like, maybe we'll hear something from Mayor Parker before the election, but I get why she kind of would probably be silent on this, because you're looking at it like, I think that a Republican's probably going to win this.
Yeah.
But I don't want to endorse him. But if things go the way that I think and I endorse Deborah or say something anti Tim O'Hare and then he wins like I think he will, then like what position does that put me in? So I get it from her perspective. I would love to see some more demonstrative talk from especially former Mayor Price, because Glen Whitley's at least been somewhat forthcoming about things.
Yeah. And what I thought was interesting here, too, is recent figures have shown that Texas Democrats have a 10-point edge with new voters and 20-point edge with young women, although Republicans remain to lead. This is what was interesting. When a Democrat is president, Texas Republicans have won past midterm elections by an average of 27 points. So, yeah, I don't know, but it's a different game. Governor Abbott is bringing a lot of enemies, has created a lot of enemies. Uvalde,
Dobbs. Dobbs just continues to be a nationwide, a massive decision when it comes to people turning out to vote and who is registering to vote and actually showing up.
The attack on schools. We'll see. It's going to be an interesting November. It's going to be interesting. All right. Well, let's go ahead and go into the big story. You were really excited about this big story because what to know? You travel the world, come back, and now you want to talk about transit density and our city's inability to get away from cars. So I'll let you take it home with us with the big story about what's going on in Fort Worth's West 7th, all the apartments and all the moves you're trying to make Fort Worth more walkable.
Yeah, there's been a number of stories recently about trains and walkability, bikeability, and density, and especially a lot of it has been focused on West 7th, and rightfully so, because that's where a lot of construction is going on to add a protected bike lane, make it a more accessible area, and there's some development there that is being opposed by some residents. Fort Worth is obviously a city designed for cars, and it makes sense. We're in oil country, like we have a lot of old money in the city that relies on oil, or in the past, that's how their wealth was created. And we have some pretty substantial parking minimums for developers. We do everything in our power to push people towards driving cars and not using public transit. And right now we're starting to see this, I don't want to say renaissance because I feel like that's giving a little bit too much credit. But we're starting to see this trend towards that changing, or at least people pushing for change there. Fort Worth's comprehensive plan, which serves as a blueprint for development, has made a point of creating walkable, pedestrian-friendly neighborhoods. And that's a term that we heard a lot, especially from Ann Zeta when she was running for mayor. Developers must now take into consideration building places designed around different kinds of transit and building the right density where people can walk and bike or be connected to transit. The city also tries to make sure that driving is an option, but not the only option. I'd say we're pretty good at making sure that driving's an option. Really, it's a mind shift, right? Like, culturally, we're having to look at a city that is growing and put in place the infrastructure that will allow for its continued growth. And I think that's maybe what some more longtime residents are in denial about, or thinking that we can like turn the tide on. And ultimately, Fort Worth is going to grow, right? Like, there is nothing stopping the city from growing in terms of how Texas has grown, being close to a major airport, having affordable cost of living relative to other major metros. And that has started on West 7th. The retrofit has been under the Transportation and Management Division, and the goal is to make the area streets safer and give multiple modes of travel besides just cars. So, I mean, the protected bike lanes will be great once they're done. It's obviously a little bit of a cluster right now, as any construction project is. But long term, this is trying to make that area a place where you could go and spend a day without your car and feel comfortable and safe walking up and down the streets, having a ton of places to stop at, go visit your friends living in one of the apartments, and then walk to 3 or 4 places. And that's ultimately a safer and more growth-friendly environment than one that is focused around cars.
What area do you think West 7th is trying to be if you had to compare it to an area in Dallas? Like, Dallas has a lot of little walkable areas. And sometimes when I get my walkable anti-car people in Fort Worth, DFW area, and they're hanging out with me for a weekend or a week, they're always like, wow. I mean, they come hang out with Fort Worth for a little bit, then they go to Dallas, like, wow, Dallas is so much more friendly to walk or than Fort Worth. So, like, do you feel like there's a model that we can emulate?
I kind of want to say around like the American Airlines Center, right? Because, and like, we'll just use the same context of like, we've got Dickies Arena, and then we've got the museums. They've got American Airlines Center, and they've got the Perot and other museums. I would say we probably have even more living down there than they do, but I think, and especially in terms of coming from Fort Worth, you could take the train over there, it drops you at the American Airlines Center. You could walk around and have places to go and hang out, eat, go to a basketball, hockey concert, take the train back, and like, you've spent the day without having to use a car. Other than maybe driving to the train station, which is a funny thing. But I think maybe that's some of the context. And then I think also, like, we've hit on and seen a lot of conversation about how, like, is crime going up in the West 7th area, and, like, what do we do about that? And ultimately, I think that eliminating cars from the situation always makes a place safer. Like, that is just a across the board, like, the U.S. kills more people with cars than any other country by a ton. And if we're removing that aspect, then as you have more people walking around, like, it just, that development helps create a safer area in general. And I think right now, like, we were driving down University from the Stockyards area to Dickey's last night. Like, we came through that direction to avoid some traffic. And you look at the businesses that are on University north of West 7th, those restaurants that just, like, turn over constantly. Like, we just don't, they are in what you would think would be an ideal spot, right? Yeah. Like, theoretically, there should be a lot of foot traffic there. There's a lot of people living in the area. There's a lot to do, but nobody wants to walk up North University at all. No one wants to even cross West 7th to that side. So clearly there are things in place with the way that we've designed the area that makes it so that people don't want to go there. And adding this accessibility feature to it, I think, just actually allows Fort Worth to have more walkable communities. Yeah. And then the same thing with, it also extends, they're looking at making University in general more walkable. Like, we need to continue to add these pieces that connect the city better, where right now we're really siloed between downtown, West 7th, Stockyards, University, TCU area, near South Side, and, like, getting between them is not an easy thing at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I always find it interesting how far away our bars are for college kids. Like, if you look at like OU or A&M, like, that's like, it's a trek to get to West 7th if you're a TCU kid wanting to go out. Like, compared to, I feel like most college campuses, you know, the going out place is walkable. You can go and get there, which is interesting.
Yeah. And then the next piece of this is another Star Telegram article about, is West 7th too dense? Which is really funny. Like, if you just think of any major city and compare West 7th to it, it doesn't even hold a candle in density to any major city. But it is the most dense part of Fort Worth if we're just comparing it to us. But there are more apartment complexes that are hoping to go up in off Carroll Street in Montgomery Plaza. And city officials have expressed a desire for urban and residential development in the area, as well as walkable neighborhoods. We saw a couple years ago, these residents of Linwood shot down an affordable housing complex in the area. They said, we're not racist, but we don't want that in our neighborhood. Like, okay, guys. And so basically this apartment complex would take over the buildings that include Michael's, Five Below, Office Depot, PetSmart, and Dollar Tree. And though developers plan to add 20,000 square feet of retail on the ground level of one of the buildings. Person who was interviewed for the story that lives in the area said, there's got to be someplace else that they can find to build. I don't want them to take out my PetSmart or my Dollar Tree or my Michael's, even though I don't go in there much. Like, what? You would rather have a kind of rundown looking development of stores that you don't use versus a new apartment complex with 20,000 square feet of dynamic retail on the bottom. It's just like we're just so that area has been has had a lot of the same residents for so long, and they're just so rooted in whatever it is that they enjoy about that area that they're just going to try and shoot down anything that comes up. But
the population has increased by 89% in 20 years. I thought that was, that's pretty interesting, pretty fast. I also see here, Urban Fort Worth kind of tweeted this. West 7th recently surpassed 4,000 units of new development since 1999.
Crazy.
And our projections estimate that area will surpass 6,000 units in the coming years, only counting buildings with at least 30 units. Someone asked about the population per square mile, and Urban Fort Worth kind of said the track 1020 includes a lot of Trinity Park, the museum, botanical gardens, WRMC, etc., but it comes out to 2,171 residents per square mile. So I guess that's showcasing the most densest area, but it also kind of extends in other areas. So it's probably not the best estimate of just like Montgomery Plaza. But what is your take though? Do you feel like I always I even go, because one of my my win is going to be an economic story, but like I feel like I see more apartment buildings, but I don't see more people.
Yeah,
and that's what always confusing me.
Well, and it's interesting. There's a Fort Worth Report article about how rent increases are starting to level off, but demand is still there for Fort Worth apartments. Mm-hmm. And I felt the same way. Now, like, whenever we go shop at Tom Thumb, I'm like, okay, those apartments are definitely full. Like, there's a ton of cars parked there. The near South Side ones are the ones that I'm kind of like, I don't know if there's that many people living in them. Yeah. But it seems like the demand is still there. And honestly, like, are developers going to be trying to throw down millions of dollars in developing? Not to say that like we should just blindly trust developers, but they are dealing with a lot of people's money and their own wealth. So they do have the skin in the game to be right about this. Yeah. I do think we're in like a chicken and the egg situation right here, right? Where people don't want this development on 7th because they say it's going to bring cars. What's the solution to that? We create communities where people don't need their cars. Okay, well then those same people are saying, we don't want to invest in public transportation. Like, we don't want people that rely on public transportation living in these areas. Okay, well then we're going to develop here and we're going to add more cars because you won't help us create ways to live without a car. And so we're kind of in that like cycle right now, and dominoes need to start to fall as far as making a city where people don't need their cars to get around. Which kind of to me brings in that Trinity Metro is looking to spend more than $100 million on TexRail expansion and bus stop improvements. So this is kind of part of the upcoming budget season, with Trinity Metro is hoping to spend $106.6 million to resume capital improvement projects paused during the pandemic. Among the major projects is the TexRail expansion of the rail line to the medical district. Final design for the station is expected to be completed in either late 2022 or early 2023. Project completion set for late 2026. So that's still 4 years away, but when we look at potentially a new rail station, and then they talk more about potentially taking that even further west, now we can start to connect. Now we have hubs to connect our buses to take people to these rail stations to help get around the Metroplex. We talked a few months ago about potential high-speed rail going from Fort Worth, Arlington, Dallas. As we create a more connected Metroplex and connected city, we can finally start to move past these conversations of, we're just adding too many cars to the area, because people have actual alternatives. So that money, about $7 million, is going to come from the city. Then there's some coming from Trinity Metro, and then about $100 million coming in federal funding. So thank you, Joe Biden and the Democrats, for the infrastructure bill. He had a really funny speech the other day making fun of the Republicans that are like taking credit for the projects happening that are being funded by the bill that they voted against.
Look at that low gas.
Oh yeah, Dark Brandon rides again. But I think all of this is connected to each other. And then there was a guest column in the Fort Worth Report talking about how our voices need to be heard one way or the other when it comes to a high-speed rail investment that would connect Houston to Dallas to the one that goes Arlington to Fort Worth. So all of a sudden you're on the same train getting from Fort Worth to Houston in like an hour and a half.
Be crazy.
Like, that's faster than flying. When you take into consideration getting to the airport, getting out, and everything.
What does that do to the Wacos? The what's the one starts with an H between Waco and Fort Worth that we always have to hit? There's a Starbucks there. They have a little outlet.
Yeah, Hillsboro. Yeah.
So it's like, what does that do to all those? I feel like does it turn Texas, which is a gigantic state, into feeling like Connecticut?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wonder if. I imagine that high-speed rail will also have stops. Like I imagine that it's not just like you get on in Dallas, you get off in Houston. At least that's how the one in Japan is, right?
Yeah.
Like you get on in Tokyo, you stop in 4 or 5 places before you get to Kyoto. So I imagine that like Waco would be a pretty obvious stop, and then that becomes a potential commuting city, the way Fort Worth has been for Dallas. Like all of a sudden, people can move to Hillsboro, Waco to live and commute into Houston or Dallas or Fort Worth.
Yeah, in that same article, they talked about connecting it to Austin onto San Antonio, making a mega regions rail kind of thing. So now it's intertwined. But all of this just seems so far away. I mean,
yeah, and like we're growing so fast. I think that the past 2 years especially, but I'll say like 5 years have really brought into focus how quickly Texas has grown and how unprepared Texas wanted to be to grow. And like honestly, Fort Worth has kind of become a big city by accident, right? Like whenever we see the people that have been pulling the strings for a long time, the longtime stakeholders in Fort Worth show up in articles, it is, anti this continued density, anti this affordable housing project. But just because of how Texas has grown and being near the airport, being able to commute to Dallas, already having a few bigger companies here, Fort Worth has just exploded. And we're having that reckoning right now of, are we going to continue trying to deny that, or are we going to figure out how to do that in a more healthy way? So it's like, yeah, we are, 5-6 years behind probably. But once these projects get done, if we can get them done before 2030, when, we're expected to have grown by another like couple 100,000 people potentially by then, like we're setting ourselves up for a sustainable long term.
Yeah. All good stuff, and really things to continue to consider. I mean, I just think about West 7th. I mean, people always talk about when there used to just be a Fred's out there and Lola's, and now 20 years later, that's probably just a ripple effect, but to all other parts of Fort Worth are going to be like in the next 20 years. And that is just the first example of what that looks like. So cool to see. I mean, Fort Worth is doing a lot of cool stuff. I just think about everything around it. Now you got Lancaster and Texas A&M and what that's going to bring in, and then you still got Panther Island and that work of, whatever comes out of it. Thank you. It's in Marc Veasey's hands now. But, so it's going to be cool to see. Really exciting stuff. Well, let's go ahead and go into wins and losses, man. I will go ahead with my loss. We talked about this, but it continues to get updated. Shout out to Nicole Manna at Star Telegram. But Judge Alex Kim, I thought Wayburn could be our worst politician. Alex Kim is giving Wayburn a run for his money. I think Alex Kim should be in jail.
Yeah.
I think Alex Kim he should sure be in court, having to defend the decisions that he made around juveniles that he made decisions on. I mean, he had a 12-year-old boy on YouTube, reveal names of 2 adults who gave him guns and marijuana, but a child broadcast live on YouTube with thousands of people tuning in from across the country. He continued to do live YouTube. Most people, yes, they had to stream their cases because of the pandemic, but they did it privately in Zoom. Alex Kim did this with live chats. He had post debriefs as if it was a football game analysis about his cases, defending the decisions, why things are going. Because a kid cursed at him on live YouTube, he had to then press this kid and now put this kid in adult prison because he was 7. They were 17, and now wanted to flex the muscles in front of his viewers. You're talking 10,000 subscribers. You're talking making money off of this. They didn't take the money, but it's just all small town. This is something that should happen in small town Texas, not into the city of Fort Worth. And then you got his 2 associate judges not actually even doing their job because they're running campaigns. 60% plus of cases they're supposed to be operating, they're not. Showing up to Tim O'Hare events, this guy is that dark side, and a part of what we talked about with Carswell and Wayburn and the COVID deaths and in the prison. So big L, and we need some true accountability here. This is something our leadership should be looking into, and it shouldn't take our sole Democrat Marc Veasey to come write another letter. To do this.
Not fit to serve.
Yeah.
100% not fit to serve in public office.
What is your loss?
My loss is next weekend. Might want to avoid downtown in the convention center because Mercy Culture Church is putting on the Mercy Culture Conference. I don't know what the convention center's policy is around like hosting events. What do they say no to? But these guys have kind of proven that they should probably be somebody that shouldn't be hosting events in the largest conference center in the city. So for $150, you can go for 3 days to the Mercy Culture Conference. You can listen to speakers that they don't have. There's no announced speakers for it. So realistically, we're probably getting Landon and Heather Schott for $150 when you could get them for free every Sunday.
Yeah, at this rate, Tim O'Hare, Alex Kim might show up. Who knows?
Yeah. Get the whole gang together.
Yeah.
Tim O'Hare, maybe it's a campaign event for Tim O'Hare.
Yeah.
But a number of people who have gone to and left this church have said that it is a major grift. Honestly, I'm surprised that I haven't seen Fort Worth Weekly like cover more about this yet, or anybody really talk about it. But I don't know who's coming into town for this. I really hope nobody. I hope that this is a massive money loss for them that,
I just wonder, what's the strategy? Is it because they do really strong online video, and so now people who watch them online can come in person?
Yes.
Maybe for 3 days?
Essentially.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, their schedule online is literally just labeled like session 1, session 2, session 3, session 4. There's no information about who's speaking or what are they talking about. They're just going to let the spirit lead. And
or sacrifice somebody. It's going to be crazy.
Just, not a huge fan of their growing presence in the city. And this feels like hopefully something that isn't well attended. But it definitely adds a checkbox to the grift theory about these people.
Yeah. Ugh. Big time. My win for Fort Worth is Fort Worth crushed Dallas in economic development deals last year. Based off a Dallas Business Journal article, ranked the top North Texas economic development agencies based on the value of developments and deals in 2021. The city of Fort Worth saw $569 million in economic development last year and would have ranked number one if it hadn't been for a $30 million Texas Instrument campus in Sherman, which was the biggest industrial deal in the state's history. Fort Worth deal beats Dallas by nearly $150 million. Dallas ranks fourth on the list with $423 million in economic development, but behind the city of Mesquite, $451 million. The value of Fort Worth deals can be attributed to the city's booming hospitality industry, but you also have different companies that have came and showed up, including MP Materials, RSI SmartCap, Hoke Global Properties, Smart Action, and Whitley Incorporated. We really got a lot of traction in 817 podcasts talking about where is our economic development. And it seems like parallel with that voice, there was strategic initiatives happening in the city to elevate economic development. So it's cool to see it happening.
Yeah.
We'll see kind of continue. I'm interested to know, what does this compare to other cities across the country, and also how much of this is hospitality, apartments, things that, things like that. So it'd be cool to know. But all in all, wicked cool that we're doing something right.
Yeah. And what website is this on? Like, this isn't a Star Telegram or Fort Worth.
Yeah,
report.
it's also in the Star Telegram.
Oh, okay.
It's also in the Star Telegram. But I'm funny enough, I Googled it, and the first reference to it was AOL.com.
Yeah.
I haven't been on AOL.com since
good old AIM.
Yeah, it's good old AIM. But yeah, your win.
My win is talking about the redevelopment of Butler Place. Butler Place are the project type apartments that are off of Spur 280, that like really weird set of buildings that you're like, how did this end up squished amongst a bunch of highways? So it'll be an interesting spot to redevelop, but the city's getting a lot of proposals and interest in it, and there's a lot of interesting ideas of what the city could do with it. Among the more specific proposals are an amphitheater seating about 1,000 on 6.5 acres of the space. It's owned by Fort Worth Housing Solutions, and it is their proposal, which includes increasing accessibility to the area, providing areas for mixed-use development, and providing both market rate and affordable housing options. The historic preservation efforts in the area include the creation of a Fort Worth African American Museum and Cultural Center, saving 1,000 bricks from the site for use as part of an art installation, and maintaining a collection of historic photographs and videos related to the area. The plans are the result of a meeting with the public by the Butler Advisory Committee, and ultimately, whatever is done with this, it will be a win for the city. But I think it's more of a win that we are thinking in a creative way of mixed-use development with a museum and cultural center, trying to preserve the history of the area too. So I am excited to see what happens next from this, but I thought it was worth highlighting as a win already.
Yeah. Such an odd area with all the highways built across it that made it very difficult. It'd be really cool for it to be a bridge between the west and the east of Lancaster.
Mm-hmm.
So nice work, man. Well, we're back. We did it.
Yeah.
Back in the game. And so thank you for listening to the 817 podcast. It was a lot of information. Subscribe, share with a friend. Anything you heard that you think someone needs to hear, go ahead and let them know about it. We love doing the 817 podcast for you guys, and continue to see the growth of our community and the people who listen to the pod. We know you're a mover, a shaker, someone who's doing something super cool in the city, and we really appreciate you giving us some of your time every week.
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and we will see you next week.